For some people, making a pilgrimage to a famous location where a movie is set is a great reason for travelling. To actually be in the location, to experience the ambience of the place, or to see with your own eyes the scenery that made the movie famous is an experience that movie buffs often seek. For our next guest, his pilgrimage to see some of his favourite movie locations led him to an unknown country and probably a bit more than he bargained for. For David Froude, growing up in the 80s meant an immersion in the Star Wars trilogy. Didn't we all? It's one of my favourites. And his desire to trek to the family home of Luke Skywalker led him to the deserts of Tunisia. And he's here today to tell us all about it. Welcome to the studio, David.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Absolute pleasure. Now, Tunisia is not a place, obviously, that many people think of travelling to. Was going to see the movie locations your main focus for going there?
Yeah, it was pretty much the only reason I went there. I didn't have much of a background of the country before I went there as it was. I was planning a broader trip to Europe, and Tunisia is just sort of located across the Mediterranean, and I'd always sort of wanted to see a bit of the Star Wars stuff if I could.
Yeah.
It was just a matter of finding out where it was, how to go about getting there, and whether it was going to cost me too much and ruin the budget for the work, the bigger trip as a larger picture sort of thing.
Yeah.
Definitely a very positive experience. Good and bad points, like most travel stories.
Yep.
But yeah, that was sort of the only reason. I should mention it's not just the Star Wars movies that have been filmed there. The Indiana Jones movies were filmed there as well.
Oh, okay.
The English Patient as well. There's a couple of sort of 1950s and 60s blockbusters with all the the biblical type movies were also filmed there as well. Although I didn't visit those locations.
So how did you find out information on where to go?
I actually did an internet search when I was thinking about it. I found a really good guidebook that was Star Wars specific. It's called Tatooine on Location Tours, a guidebook to Star Wars locations in Tunisia. It's by Jeremy Beckett. It's a PDF file that you pay $5 for, and you download it, 140 pages, and it gives some background on the country as well as specific directions on how to get to the specific Star Wars sites as well.
140 pages as a background document.
The guy was very thorough.
Very, very, very thorough. And did it give you quite specific information on how to get to places and what to see there?
It had lots of diagrams, pictures and so forth that are hand drawings, things like that. Lots of sign points to look out for, landmarks and things like that. Yeah, so it was definitely an invaluable tool for me. And for $5, I mean, you can't go wrong. It was even interesting without even going there, just to read about the country anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a bit of a Star Wars nerd, then definitely for $5 you can
to get that
some
background
useful information. Yeah, definitely.
So whereabouts is Tunisia?
It's the northernmost point of Africa.
Right.
It's sort of in between Libya and Algeria, and just across the Mediterranean from Italy. It's not that big a country, about 10 million people.
It's a pretty small country though, isn't it? It's sort of jammed in there.
Jammed in there, definitely.
Yeah.
And did you get across there by boat or by plane? Or
we looked at both options. It was more convenient, we thought at the time, to go by boat. It was a bit cheaper as well. It was about 80 euros for a return trip from Palermo, which is in Sicily.
Mm-hmm.
When we looked at airfares, we were looking at sort of €200. The problem with the ferries, we found out later on, was that they don't go every day. You've got to kind of plan to get there one day, and then the next one will come back 3 days later. So you've got to commit to going for sort of 4 days or 7 days or 10 days, multiples of 3, which I guess is okay, but we sort of probably needed a little bit longer. It's very hard to change your plans once you're there as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you had an idea about where you were going, but you didn't necessarily book into a tour.
No, in hindsight, I probably should have.
Okay. That's some pretty good advice.
It was very difficult. I was quite lucky. I was travelling with someone who speaks fluent French.
That's the primary language
it's
there?
It's the secondary language. The primary language is Arabic.
Mm-hmm.
You don't speak Arabic?
No, I don't.
Oh, shame.
I don't even know how to say thank you or please or anything like that. So, I mean, my grasp of French is a phrase book, so that's not going to cut it either. So I was very lucky to be travelling with someone who spoke French. I would highly recommend not going there if you don't have access to, unless you go on a tour, unless you have, quite fluent French. Majority of the population is bilingual. They're taught French in schools. The reason for that is that it was once a French territory that gained independence in the 1950s. And they've sort of maintained the language as a link to that as well.
But not so much English.
No, not much English there. I think I met one guy there who was able to communicate with me well in English, and he was trying to rip me off, so...
Damn it!
He actually
the one time you actually do connect with someone, and
he
they're just
actually
trying to
asked
get
to
money
borrow
off you.
my hire car. I just arrived at the hotel, and he asked if you could borrow it, and I said, I'm not too sure if the insurance would cover you, mate, so I might have to say no.
I was doing a bit of background reading just before you came on the show, Dave, and apparently, they have like Arabic they learn in school, so they learn Tunisian Arabic at home, standard Arabic in school, then they start learning French, and then a lot of them now speak Frourabic, which is like a mixture of French and Arabic, but not much English.
It's just a word salad to me.
So it is a good thing that you had your friend there who could help you.
Absolutely. I mean, I travelled with her for the first day of the trip. She wasn't that interested in Star Wars.
I was going to ask, was she a Star Wars fan? Or?
So we dropped her off at the resort on the first day that she wanted to stay at, in a place called Nabul. And I rented the car and headed south to a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
So you struck out by yourself?
Yeah, in hindsight, she said she should have gone with me because the resort was a bit. When we say resort, it's a Tunisian style resort. It's not what we're sort of used to, and she probably didn't enjoy herself that much. And I had quite an adventure driving through foreign terrain and trying to interact with people, and the local military as well sort of stopped me a couple of times when I was driving. And
really?
Wanted to see my papers, and I was sort of non parlez-vous français, and they kind of look at me and wave me on and say, it's just another dumb American. So
that's a good technique. I'll try and use that one day.
And so were these locations, the Star Wars movie locations, were they close to each other, or did you trek from one side of the country to the other?
Then there's sort of majority of them in the south of Tunisia. We came in at the north at Tunis, and I had an 8-hour drive south to the first location. And then some of the other locations are across to the west of the country, near the border of Algeria, but it's not recommended you travel there or near there on your own, because they quite often come across the border and kidnap Westerners and ransom them off, or they're never seen again. So I chose not to go over there by myself. I went to a place called Matmata, which is the location of Luke Skywalker's house, for those who've seen the movie, his underground house. It's actually a hotel there called the City Driss Hotel where you can stay. It's about $10 Australian to stay there for the night.
Can you stay in his bedroom?
No, well, you never see his bedroom in the movie. So you can just sort of say you've stayed in his house, and that's about as close as you can get. The internal part of the building's there, but the actual exterior shots were shot 300 kilometres across the other side of the country, in the desert, and that was one of the places I wasn't really feeling too safe to go to. So it would have been nice for the photo opportunity to get that staring off into the sun and the wind blowing in your face like in the movie, but...
Well, they had those hover sort of race car scenes,
well,
didn't they?
Land Speeder would have been very helpful.
Yeah.
I just had a little Ford Focus that was a bit slower.
Doesn't quite go as fast, It's not nearly as fun.
Yeah, so Matmata was sort of the main location for me. That's where I wanted to get to. I was also able to go a bit further south to a place called Medinine, which is where some of the newer trilogy was shot. Anakin's house, the slave quarters, which has actually been turned into a marketplace. It's not really any indication that it was part of the Star Wars movie. They're just sort of a market's popped up there because a lot of tourists happen to go there. And the last place I got to was even further south, sort of heading down towards the Sahara, a town called Tatooine, which is the basis for the name of Luke's home planet. So obviously George Lucas has seen this on a sign somewhere and gone, I kind of like that.
That sounds catchy.
Yeah.
It's a real place.
It is a real place. Change a few letters around, but the actual spelling and pronunciation is pretty close, yeah.
I was going to ask that, like, is there any signage to say this is a famous movie location, or is it you have to have the inside knowledge to get there and to know?
You need the inside knowledge to get to the place. The Hotel City Druce has actually got quite a lot of Star Wars merchandise up on the walls. There's signed photos with George Lucas. There's people who go there actually give the manager like toys and souvenirs and things like that. So it's quite interesting to see some of the stuff that's been there for 20 years. Some of the merchandise. I mean, Star Wars is pretty big for that kind of thing. That's what made most of the money for George Lucas.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting to see all that stuff. It's a bit of a time capsule for what's been out there back in the 80s.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you got to experience it firsthand.
I did.
Well, we might quickly head to a song and then we'll come back and talk more. Now, Dave, you've actually brought some of your own music along. You're in a band, I believe.
I have.
Bit of a rock star in your own right.
Well, no, I'm just a drummer.
Oh, hey, the sexy drummer. That's even better. So we've got a couple of tracks to play from your band. Tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Okay, we're called Chemistry Set. The band's been around about 5 years. Creation of one Denny Cruz is the main singer-songwriter.
Mm-hmm.
I joined the band about 2 years ago and just sort of looking to get gigs around Melbourne. We've just recorded a debut EP, which this next song is off.
Excellent.
I'll give some details a bit later of our next gig.
Absolutely.
But this track is Anticipation, which is the first track off our EP.
Okay.
Right. Let's hit
we'll
it.
head to that.
We'll be back soon.
You're listening to Travelling the Airwaves on 3WBC 94.1 FM.
Don't wave your hands in front of my face. A scene unfolds before me, fully formed. Playing private detectives with you now as lead. Magnify the motives.
Welcome back. You're listening to Travelling the Airwaves with Prue and Dave on this very, very lovely Sunday. And we're talking to David Froude, who's telling us all about his adventures on the planet Tatooine, otherwise known as Tunisia, because he went over there to actually experience it firsthand, those amazing movie locations that took place in the Star Wars films. Dave, welcome back to the studio. Thank you for joining us.
For having me.
And we just heard a bit of your own music, a bit of Chemistry Set, part of the band that you're in.
That's correct.
Very, very nice. Thank you very much for bringing it in.
Thank you for playing it.
Oh, pleasure. We'll certainly play another one of the songs in just a few minutes' time.
Not just a drummer.
Not just a drummer, but a world adventurer as well. Now, we were talking about some of your adventures over in Tunisia. You were telling us that you were getting around in a rental car.
Yep.
By yourself, largely. You had someone who could help you with some of the French at the start of the trip, and then you struck out by yourself and headed into the desert alone.
Yep.
What was it like? How was driving on roads where you don't speak the language very well? I know I've had trouble in Japan when I've been driving around and finding all of the signs are in kanji. And I'm like, oh, great, it's a picture to me. I don't know where I'm going. Did you find the same when you were driving in Tunisia?
Actually, driving's quite easy there. You drive on the right-hand side of the road, so that's something you have to get used to. But a lot of the signage is in Arabic and sort of Roman characterizations as well, so you can read off that and then read off the map you've got. The map I had sort of covered the whole country, and you think that wouldn't be detailed enough, but the road system in Tunisia is very sparse. There's sort of one way of getting from one town to the next, and they're 100 kilometres apart, and that's the only road there is, so you can't really get lost. As long as you're heading in the general direction, you can't veer off into the desert. There's no sort of arterial roads that will, a back way or anything like that.
You're not going to come to a fork in the road and get completely lost too often.
It's always just keep heading south, and you'll eventually get to where you want to get to. Keep the beach on the left and the desert on the right, and you'll find your location.
What were the road conditions like?
Single lane roads, soft shoulder in that, as soon as the road ends, you're driving on the desert, so sand and rock and that sort of thing. You could go up to about 80 k an hour fairly safely. After that, you'd get a bit bumpy. The locals are pretty crazy on the roads. The onus is not on the overtaker to make sure it's safe. It's on the person coming the other way to slow down to let them pass. And the locals seem to only do about 50 kilometres an hour because their cars were probably built back in the 70s, and they've just kept them running. I don't think there's a lot of inter-town transport. I think people generally stay around where they live. They don't
quite localised.
They don't trip around.
So you really needed a hire car to be able to get between places.
There were other options, but there are some buses. They're very limited. The train network sort of only goes up and down the coast. It doesn't go inland at all. And being that I didn't speak the language, I figured it'd be easier just to get the car, and I can read a map. That's one thing I can do as a drummer. And I figured I would just follow that and end up hopefully in the right place. And if not, I'll just turn around and head back the same way I came, sleep in the car if necessary.
So the major income of Tunisian people is the sea, or do they have agriculture?
They do fish. They have some livestock. They have a lot of sheep, lamb, sort of the main dish that they'll eat over there. They have couscous and things like that they can grow in the fields. It appears, I didn't actually stop at any of these places, but some of the places along the roadside, they have what looks like a barbecue where they'll have a lamb up on a rack and a couple of old blokes sitting around drinking beer, and you could pull over and maybe have some of that with them. And
it's like a Tunisian souvlaki.
Yeah. And they'll have like a pottery stall where there's some ceramic type things that have obviously been made by the locals. I picked a few of those up on the way out. I didn't want to be lugging them around.
Yeah.
In my backpack.
Did they make it back safe?
They did.
Oh, well done.
They did.
I always freak out when I buy pottery. It's my next. I have to look after it. When you're travelling around, did you buy the map once you were there, or did you source this map before you went?
The map was from the tourist, or the port where we docked from the ferry. We picked one up there.
Yep.
And that sort of got us through the whole 4-day experience. Had a bit of background information. It was an English map too, so
Oh, great.
it had a little bit of background information about what to expect.
Yep.
But I don't know if that really helped all that much. I definitely felt a little bit over my head pretty much the whole time I was there.
Really?
Yeah, I went back and looked at my. I write a travel diary when I go on these trips, and I was looking through it in preparation for this segment, and there's lots of swear words in there, lots of frustrations. So.
Well, what were some of those? What were the major frustrations?
Oh, I thought you were asking about the swear words. I was going to say, well, please don't repeat them.
G rating.
We did have an issue when we got to port. We arrived at 2 a.m. in the morning, and we were told that. Well, we checked the Smart Traveller website, and it said you could buy a visa as an Australian citizen at the border. But when we got there, we were told that, this isn't possible.
Oh, dear.
So we spent a bit of toing and froing. We had to get currency exchange, but the currency exchange centre was shut, so we had to barter with a local and got ripped off on this so we could have some Tunisian diners to trade with or to buy these visas with once we were able to sort of sweet talk, the border control. That was one sort of issue. After we finally got access to the country, we jumped in a cab to go to our hostel in Tunis, in the capital, and the cab driver sort of dropped us off in this seedy area. He dropped us off near a mosque, and we thought, okay, well, that's a good reference point for us to be able to find where we need to get to, but there was security guards walking around with automatic machine guns, and we're like, I don't know how safe we feel here. So we took off on the directions that the hostel had given us, and we're actually walking through these back streets, and there was people sleeping in corners, and we were obviously in a bit of a, as I said, a seedy part of town, and it was quite eerie, and there was dogs roaming the streets, and we heard garbage bins rattling, and a pack of dogs had run around the corner, and luckily a local who obviously was used to seeing lost backpackers in the area directed us to the hostel, and we managed to make it there about 4 a.m. So it was, it was a long day. The ferry left Italy, it must have been midday. So it was 10 or 11 hours on the boat, and then 2 to 3 hours at border control, and then trying to find our hostel. We were pretty exhausted by the time we got there.
Yeah. At what point did you sort of go, do I love Star Wars this much? Do I really need to see this
I
place?
do love Star Wars that much, so it's certainly worth it.
Love the commitment.
Very much so. And I suppose it's, when you do look back and you realise you got out of it alive and it was an experience rather than a really, really bad experience, it's good to have those
it's all
experiences.
positive
It's
in
part
the
of
end.
travelling.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you were there and when you were travelling around, were you staying, when you were trekking down south, were you staying in accommodations, or where were you sleeping? What were you eating?
I sort of, being a backpacker, I was trying to be as tight as possible.
Yeah.
So I went to one of the local supermarkets and just sort of loaded up on baguettes and processed meats and some cheese, and I just sort of lived off that. That was sort of the most cost effective. It also meant I didn't have to interact with the locals too much. Which is unfortunate, but it just meant I could sort of have it all sitting in my pack. And
So there was quite a lot of familiar food that you could.
yeah, they
access
had
at the
some
supermarket.
French supermarkets there, like Monoprix and Carrefour, which are sort of larger chains over there. And they sort of have Western type cuisine that you can buy,
Yep.
and then that's sort of more in the touristy, like that was the resort town we stopped at, so they sort of have that sort of food that is a bit more palatable to my stomach.
Yeah. You're not going to get exceedingly ripped off either.
Yeah.
No, generally you can see what it's going to cost you, and yeah.
Exactly.
So you packed up and headed off into the desert.
Yeah.
What would you suggest for people who would like to sort of follow in your footsteps and go and see these sorts of places? What would you suggest they do before they go?
A lot more research.
Right.
I would have a lot more of a plan, or especially if you're not familiar with the local languages. I would recommend flying into Tunis. It seems around the airport locations it's a lot more friendly to Western type
Yeah,
tourists. That's where all the rental car companies are based. So if you're going to rent a car, that's where you can get it from. One of the other options, which I should have probably explored a bit further, is you can actually get in contact with one of the Tunisian tourist agencies or tourist boards and request a guide who you'll pay a daily fee to basically direct you around. You just give them where you want to go, and they'll take you there, and they'll
They're your link,
for you.
they're your
and-
interpreter.
Yeah, that's right.
They're the ones making sure you're not getting ripped off.
Yes, that's right.
Well, only ripped off to their friends.
Well, yeah, that's right. It sounds like very, very...
The ones asking to borrow your rent-a-car.
Yes, yes.
It's pretty bold, straight up, really.
Very.
Power to him.
Overall, you enjoyed it as an experience?
Oh, I loved it.
Yeah.
Now that I look back on it, a few frustrating hours here and there. Would love to go back and get to the places I didn't get to. There's a couple more that are still on the to-do list. So maybe one day.
Now that you know what you're in for as well.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a lot easier. Dave, thank you so much for coming and talking to us about it.
Great.
Certainly a topic and a place we've never covered before on the show. So thanks for your insight.
You're more than welcome.
Now we're going to listen to another one of your songs from Chemistry Set. And what are we listening to now?
This track's called Chicken.
Chicken.
Once again off our debut EP, The Formula, which will be coming out in the next couple of months. We have a website.
Great. What is it?
chemistryset.com.au. Also available on MySpace and Facebook. So if you just check there for details, it should be out hopefully by the middle of the year.
Great. And have you got any gigs coming up?
Yeah, we've got a big one coming up in May on the 7th at the Revellers Bar in Fitzroy with a couple other bands. It'll be $6 on the door, and we're hoping to get a big crowd down there.
Brilliant. So head down to the Revellers Bar in Fitzroy on May the
7th, Friday night.
To listen to Chemistry Set. Well, Dave, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you again.
And we'll head to Chicken by Chemistry Set. You're listening to Travelling the Airwaves on 3WBC 94.1 FM.